Welcome to Social Work Foundations. I am Dr. Karen Smith-Bertabi, and this lecture will focus on the 5 steps of problem solving, and then we'll expand that to include the 6-step case management strategy that incorporates ideas of resilience, self-determination, and thoughtful planning with the client as active partner in defining their own roadmap for change. The strengths perspective will be a beginning place as we then consider resilience and all the other ideas that come together within case management as a strategy. Let's look at strengths-based practice. It is an approach to practice in which we frame the client with an orientation of resourcefulness and resilience as they are confronted with challenges or adversity. In this practice approach, the relationship between social worker and client focuses on collaboration and determining the right course of action. We recognize that people are resourceful and capable of solving their own problems with social workers as partners, helping the client develop their own roadmap for change. This is called the problem-solving process in social work. Concept of resilience is really critical. Why do some people experience extreme adversity and bounce back quickly, having grown from their experience, become stronger and more confident, while others seem to have difficulty bouncing back? This is an important question. What makes one individual resilient versus another? We know from theory that there are different aspects of resilience, and we borrow from that theory from psychology and sociology, mainly psychology. In this particular TED Talk that I'm directing you to, Lucy Hone looks at 3 resilient secrets, and she talks from a first-person narrative. She's demonstrating reflective thinking on her own adversity and what she understands about resilience as a researcher. At this point, I need you to look at this video because it'll help you then move forward in case management as a step and a strategy building upon problem solving. Okay, we have a 5-step problem solving model. At first, we identify the problem. Now, this is something we do as social workers directly with the client and make sure that we have a clear problem statement. The client will let you know where they think they need to begin and what are the causes and responses to the problems become early in their next step of assessment. Looking at the full picture of the client problems, the core issues, and then their resources. The assessment will help start looking at the client's resources and how they have a variety of coping mechanisms as well as access to different strengths in their systems of care, and their community. As you come together with the client to identify the plan and make that assessment, you will then move towards developing a plan and setting goals. Then you move to implementation in step 4, and finally, evaluation of progress. This is the basic problem-solving model. We build upon this model in different ways as we approach different problems in social work, and I am now going to expand this problem-solving model to case management. You can look at the same ideas, engagement of the client, and we're building on relationship there in step number 1. We move to assessment of the client's needs, and that builds into a partnership of determining what is happening and what are the resources in that client system. And then we set goals and we plan treatment. That's the planning step of case management. Now here's the addition to the 5 steps of problem solving. Here's the addition. Linking client to other services by making referrals to services in the community. Linking is what we call brokering in social work, and we'll look at that a little closer. Then we evaluate the work done in a monitoring approach. And then 6, we terminate the relationship. And terminate sounds a little extreme, so maybe case closure is a better way of talking about it because it incorporates the idea of closure of relationship. So just to be clear, step number 4 is added here to the 5 steps of problem solving. Okay, 6 steps of case management are illustrated here. This looks kind of complicated, and we'll pause here to have a look. But recognize that step number 1 is to the engagement in the relationship building. Now that step number 1 is really important because it follows the case management process across the entire set of strategies all the way through step 6. Then, as we move to step number 2, the assessment of the situation. As we already talked about in the problem solving model, that's where you look at the full situation with the client, determine what kind of challenges there are, but importantly, what are the resources in the client's system. Family systems are looked at. What are the sources of social support, informal and formal? And within those systems, what are some of the challenges? The group dynamics, the family dynamics, the challenges in the community. This is the full picture of the client. Now think about Mary Richmond's social diagnosis. She looks at the assessment in different scales, and this is an opportunity to think about that as well as the expanded upon model that we've already looked at. We move to step number 3, and this is planning, in which we set goals and objectives. Now we're going to look closer at how goals are written, and I'm going to give you the SMART goals as a way of thinking. But let's just pause there and think about planning. How do we move forward to set goals and objectives? You have to do an effective assessment step with the client as partner, in which we are engaged in active listening to determine what kinds of resources there are in the systems. And then as we set goals, we're moving towards contracting. That is goals, measurable objectives, very clearly defined tasks, timelines. And all of these ideas of contracting are then aligned with the organizational resources and the organization in which you're working as a social worker, as well as the community service systems that are surround that client in their day-to-day life and accesses to resource. Then we go to number 4, that's the linking. Now this is that additional step that builds upon the problem-solving model. So linking to referrals in the community service systems. Now each community is different. Some communities will have greater health access, while other communities will have lesser access. Some communities may have rehabilitative services for substance abuse and addictions that would be nested underneath their mental health care. Other communities will have greater family support services because that typically is found in the nonprofit sector. There's a whole array of opportunities available or not, depending on the community. Of course, you can link to school-based services as well as other services that the client may be able to inform you of or you're aware of as the resource and referral system in your community. Once we make the linkages, we begin to monitor and make sure that the client is making those connections, getting engaged in the services that have been available to them, either in your organization or externally. As we evaluate the progress, and we have also evaluate the process, have those services and systems been accessible to the client? Have they been able to gain access to the programs and services that they need, either within your organization or external? Once you have that roadmap of goals and objectives, you can then evaluate the progress and the process. And then 6, the termination of the relationship or closure of relationship as the case management process ends. Let's have a closer look. So we begin at number 1, we engage the client. This is ideas about developing rapport and cultivating the relationship between professional and client, and the person in need is definitely in the needs of relationship development. We have to build rapport in order to develop trust, be able to move forward. And we know that the way a relationship begins is the best predictor of the long-term relationship. So we really take great care and attention to rapport building early on, getting to know the client, setting expectations. What you can and can't do as a social worker is a showing of kindness and respect early on. And the importance of respect as someone is engaging with you as they are at a place of crisis or in great need. Kindness is very much a part of developing a relationship. You start with introducing yourself and you make sure the conversation is interactive and expressing of concern and empathy. You ask clients questions that are attentive to their need and listen attentively to build on what the client says and moving forward in the helping relationship. Then we move to assessment, step number 2. The client's needs with information that you can learn from the client is critical, and we have to work together, the social worker and client, in a partnership to identify problems and possible solutions, start to develop the goals, objectives, and tasks and timelines that are in the next step. Remember, strengths and resilience are critical ideas, and identification of these personal resources is essential. Often social service organizations will have standardized forms for an assessment that will guide your process. Frequently, we don't have a choice but to use those forms, but we can use ourselves and our knowledge of the field and how to engage with others to move above and beyond the sense of a checkbox form experience. Now, I would encourage you to go out into Google and on the internet and find some forms online, and we'll look at a form in just a minute. We want to be able to collect information from the client relevant to the challenges that brought him or her to seek your help in social services. Remember, in the assessment step, problem solving is a process and it involves a series of interactions between clients and the client systems and the social worker. These interactions focus on what the clients think, feel, and want to do about the problem situation. This is purposeful, guided, and process oriented, and it seeks to help clients eventually achieve their identified goals while building upon an individual's strengths, confidence, and resilience. Sounds an awful lot like empowerment, doesn't it? Precisely. Problem solving is oriented towards ultimately that experience of empowerment, that is, greater sense of strength, confidence, and building on one's full resource system to be resilient and gain their rights and opportunities to reach their highest personal potential. Okay, here's a needs assessment form. I found this from the Interagency Guidelines for Case Management and Child Protection. You can see that it's a fill in the box, fill in the blanks kind of approach. That doesn't mean that the process has to feel rigid or mechanical, but it does give you a way to make systematic data entry, and that helps inform your agency's work more effectively on the macro scale when we start to look at how we can make data-driven decisions about planning for programs and services that are most logically aligned with need. Here's more. You can see that this is oriented to safety and whether or not the child can be protected from child abuse and neglect. This is an international example. Frequently, children who are in a refugee kind of scenario is how this particular assessment form has been developed. Okay, so moving from that assessment form and gathering all that information, we want to set goals and plan treatment. We're always putting the client's needs first and help them figure out what are the challenges that they're experiencing and the kinds of choices they may make. We want to keep in our forefront of our mind that every client is a worthy person and human dignity is really critical as they experience their right to self-determination. That means being actively engaged as partner in developing their treatment goals and plan. As we look forward, we'll think about goals, objectives, tasks, and timeline as critical in this step. SMART goals help us as social workers keep very clear about the specific goals, which are defined and focused, inclusive of tasks, which identify the who is to do what, including when. The who is not only the client, but also the social worker or others in the organizational and community resource system. M for measurable indicates how often the expectation of the task must be met, along with clear definition of the behavior or targeted problem for change. Then we have attainable, feasible expectations that must be set so the client may not have success. So the client may not only have success but feel hopeful in the planning process. R is relevant. The task must fit the client's needs. And then finally, team, time-based. We set clear expectations for time frame, which are realistic, attainable, and meaningful for change. Here's another way of looking at SMART goals. Okay, as we look at step number 4, making linkages for referrals, this is that additional step off the 5-step problem-solving model. Social workers, brokers, we must identify how people can move forward with making those linkages in the community with inputs from the client, where the different services are accessible or the need for additional services may be found in healthcare, counseling for mental health, such as rehabilitation services in the case of substance abuse, family support and services, educational support and related services, and much more, depending on the unique needs of the case. The service plan will identify the locations where various programs and services are available how they can be obtained, and it sets expectations for seeking care as appropriate to each and every individual case. Depending on the resource base in your community, the referrals will look differently. This is where you have a lot of flexibility depending on what the resource system is. In a high resource country, you would find a whole array of services, government, non-government. In a lower resource country, such as in Africa or Asia, there may be lesser formalized services, but you can still make a care plan based on those resources in that client user system. So as we move through the planning process using those SMART goals, we eventually move to monitoring, where we evaluate the work accomplished. Evaluating means the process, the methods, outcomes, and the progress made. Reflect upon each change outcome with the client and look at the process of change as separate pieces of the plan. The outcome is the behavioral change, and the process is the actual steps. Was the client able to link to the services and programs that you set forth in that care plan? Then you need to ask yourself, as a social worker, did I work in a participatory manner with the client? Did we see self-determination occur when the client engaged in developing their own goals and developing their own plans? And was empowerment experienced? All of this comes in within the strengths perspective at recognizing that people are capable of solving their own problems when given the right opportunities. Did the client meet measurable objectives of the plan? Did they follow through with the referrals in step number 4 in the linkage step? And then we want to ask ourselves, do the clients feel like they met their personal goals? Ask them, do you feel like you met your goals? Very simple. As you review the process and you move through this evaluation and monitoring step, we also have to ask, was the organizational resources mobilized in a way that the organization actually met goals of serving the client? As we terminate or move through closure of the relationship, we need to know that this is the beginning stages all the way through to ending. And rapport has been built across all of the steps so far. And the way we end a relationship is critical because our client needs to feel a sense of what we call case closure or sense of emotional closure. If you've had a successful relationship, that'll be really important to the client as they move forward more independently, looking at their own problem solving the future without a case plan. All of our relationships have beginnings and endings, and we start with that building rapport, and the way we end that relationship is also about rapport. As the client experiences helping relationships, we need to honor those endings. Quite often, this might be the first time they felt successful in a step-by-step problem-solving process, and in the way we go through closure is an honor of that experience. There might be times when the process has not been satisfactory. We know that there are many clients that are not satisfied with being a part of social services. And so it's also important to acknowledge that in endings if in fact there's a disappointment with the process or a frustration or even a sense of disengagement because the client didn't want to be there. We have mandated programs and services at times in which people don't actually choose to be there. And so how we terminate and close that relationship may look aligned with a disengagement from the beginning. However it happens, we need to be mindful of closure. Okay, let's look at case management overall. It does date back to some of the earliest practices of social work and even before the Elizabethan Poor Laws. The first book written on social work and case management was Mary Richmond's Social Diagnosis, published in 1917. And we know that case management is a process plan that seeks to advocate and monitor services by all the array of social services or healthcare organizations on behalf of the client. The case management most often focuses on the individual and or family while considering resources of organizations, social services agencies, and other resources found in the community. In general, case management follows the steps of the problem-solving model as we've reviewed thus far. The functions of the case manager, the job description will vary depending on the organization as well as the types of clients served. There are some general functions that are carried out by case managers, however. Assessment of the client is essential, and you'll find that in all case management job descriptions. We focus on the needs and strengths of the client, and we always ask questions about resilience. Also, as social workers, we develop a case plan, established a written contract negotiated directly with the client. We implement the case plan, tying it directly to the social service organization capacity to respond or refer to clients elsewhere for services. So we work with clients directly within our organizational system as well as linking or referring the clients elsewhere. Then we monitor and evaluate with a plan for termination of services. This is a critical step. When developing programs and services, it's important to note that part of the macro process is necessary would be considered case management from an effectiveness perspective. A referral network is essential, and social workers are engaged in developing these networks and identifying need. It's part of developing programs and services. As we see a need, a gap, a service that's not available in the community, it's essential that we look at how we might be able to develop that program and service within our own organization or collaborate with others. Okay, as we move towards closing, let's look at Rapid Lane's definition here, and it's a strengths perspective of the relationship between client and social worker. Looking at identifying the needed resources, being observant of the barriers to care, and making plans to resolve issues. It could be simply a verbal agreement, but a written plan is important as it is very beneficial to actually put something down in black and white. The visual document identifies goals and steps, tasks necessary to accomplish, and the importance of a plan is committed to in writing. A firm record of accomplishments is important to honoring that relationship and making sure that progress is very much acknowledged. And a written plan can guide the client and case manager in determining what the next steps are and starting over with the new goal and objective, perhaps. So let's think critically about case management. Why is it important to commit to a case management plan in writing? What is the importance to the client? What's the importance to the social worker? And then you can define the difference between goal, objective, task, and timeline. What are the differences? As we move towards closure here, client participation and planning is critical for self-determination. We consider the characteristics, circumstances, values, and preferences of clients, as well as their expectations. And it's important that they be involved in their own decision making. This is part of essential work for self-determination. Okay, let's double check here on empowerment again. It's a process that enables individuals or group to fully access their personal or collective power. They have authority and influence over how they engage with other people, institutions, or society. We always want to make sure that people feel like they've improved their own well-being. They are more confident and feeling stronger in achieving their goals as they exercise self-determination. How do people gain power and control over their circumstances? How do they achieve their own goals? What kinds of skills do we need as social workers in moving forward to help people help themselves and maximize their quality of lives? How do they reach their highest potential? What are those skills? We've now set forth the strategy of case management based on the 5-step problem-solving model, expanding to the 6 steps of case management. Let's look at a case example. Go to this YouTube video at the CPMS Standard 15 of Case Management. You'll see Omar's experience in a context of a low-resource country. I want you to ask yourself, how may this kind of case look in your community with greater resources? What are the ideas that are presented applicable to your community? Do you have refugees in your community? Do you have people displaced by needs to immigrate? I suspect so. We're at the greatest level of human move in the history of mankind right now, and people are coming to many high-resource countries from locations around the world. Okay, we've come to the end of this lecture. Please refer to the videos stated in this lecture to build upon the major ideas. Thank you.